Imagine getting slapped with a $500 fine, just for building a wheelchair ramp to your own home. That's exactly what happened to me. But instead of tearing it down, I did something no one in my neighborhood will ever forget. I became the landlord of the entire building. Stick around to hear how I turned their power play into the ultimate comeback. And hey, before we dive in, smash that like button, subscribe if you love wild real-life stories. And let's get into it. $500. I repeated, my voice shaking as I stared at the crisp white envelope in my trembling hands. The HOA president, Mr. Douglas Harkins, stood on my porch with a smug grin that could slice through steel. "That's correct," he said, his voice slick with satisfaction. "Your wheelchair ramp violates the community design code. Pay the fine within 30 days or we'll take further action." My jaw dropped. A fine for a wheelchair ramp? My ramp wasn't flashy or ugly, it was a simple wooden structure that allowed me to leave my own home safely. I was still recovering from a spinal injury, but to Harkins, my need for independence was nothing more than a violation. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "This is for my mobility. You can't just—" "But I can," he interrupted, tapping the edge of his clipboard like a judge slamming a gavel. The board voted. Rules are rules. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that in less than a month, I would hold the deed to the very building he ruled over. The same smug man who tried to crush me with a $500 fine would soon be mailing me his monthly dues. But how does someone go from being fined for a wheelchair ramp to becoming the landlord of an entire building? That's where the story really begins. Before the ramp, before the fine, my life was about quiet mornings and cautious hope. I had moved to Maplewood Residences after a car accident left me in a wheelchair. The community brochure promised kind neighbors and easy living, and at first, it delivered. My unit was small but cozy, the type of place where you could smell fresh bread from the bakery across the street if you opened your window early enough. I met a few residents during my first weeks. Mrs. Kelly from Unit 3 brought me homemade cookies. A teenage boy named Aaron offered to help carry groceries whenever he saw me struggling. Their kindness gave me a reason to smile, even as I worked through painful physical therapy sessions. For a while, it felt like maybe life was finally settling into something normal. Then came the day I realized my front steps were more dangerous than I'd admitted. One rainy evening, my wheelchair slipped on the slick edge of the porch. I barely caught myself before toppling backward. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it echo in my ears. That night, I decided to install a ramp. Safety over pride. A family friend named Luke offered to build it. He spent 2 weekends measuring and hammering, making sure every angle was safe and sturdy. When he finished, I felt a freedom I hadn't felt in months. Rolling down that ramp for the first time felt like reclaiming a piece of my independence. But not everyone saw it that way. The first complaint arrived 2 days later, a typed letter shoved under my door. "Ramp does not match the community's aesthetic standards," it read. No signature. Just cold words on white paper. I tried to brush it off. Maybe someone was having a bad day. Maybe it was a mistake. But the next week, I received another note. And another. Each one nastier than the last. Words like eyesore and property value appeared over and over. My stomach twisted every time I checked the mail. I finally called the HOA office, hoping for understanding. Instead, the secretary informed me that the president himself had raised the issue. "Mr. Harkins says all exterior modifications must be approved," she explained. I reminded her it was a wheelchair ramp, something protected by law. She sighed, almost apologetic, but said her hands were tied. That night, a neighbor quietly knocked on my door. It was Mrs. Kelly. "Be careful," she whispered. "Harkins doesn't like being told no." Her warning sent a chill down my spine. A week later, the notice arrived, a formal violation letter and a $500 fine. My heart pounded as I read it, each sentence dripping with authority and arrogance. I felt anger, fear, and disbelief all at once. How could anyone be so cruel over something meant to help me survive? I knew I couldn't let him win. But I also knew this fight wasn't going to be easy. The next morning, I made a phone call that would change everything. Not to the HOA. Not to a lawyer. To someone who held a secret about Maplewood residences, a secret Harkins would never see coming. And that's when the real plan began to form. The phone call was short, but the promise it carried echoed in my chest like a thunderclap. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet of my small living room, staring at the notice of violation that lay on the coffee table. My wheelchair ramp, something that gave me freedom, was now labeled a community disturbance. I wanted to rip the paper in half, but instead I slid it under a stack of mail. I wasn't going to show Harkins my fear. Not yet. The next few days were a swirl of whispers and sideways glances. Residents who used to wave now avoided my eyes when I rolled past. The mailbox felt heavier every morning, as if another letter might jump out and crush my spirit. But there was no new notice, just silence until I saw the meeting flyer taped to my door. Special HOA session, ramp violation review. Attendance mandatory. My stomach dropped. The meeting was scheduled for Friday evening in the community hall. I knew it wasn't really a review. It was an ambush. Friday came too quickly. The hall smelled faintly of floor polish and stale coffee. Folding chairs were arranged in a crooked circle. Harkins stood at the front, his polished shoes clicking on the tile as he greeted each board member with a firm handshake. His grin widened when he saw me roll in. "Our guest of honor," he said loudly enough for the whole room to hear. "We're here to discuss your creative addition to the property." The room filled with nervous chuckles. I caught sight of Mrs. Kelly sitting in the back, her eyes full of quiet support. Harkins began the meeting with a speech about community standards and protecting property values. He waved pictures of my ramp like they were evidence in a crime trial. "This," he declared, slapping the photos onto the table, "is a clear violation of design guidelines. If we let one person break the rules, what's next? Neon fences? Giant statues?" A man on the board raised his hand. "But it's a wheelchair ramp," he said cautiously. "Isn't that?" Harkins cut him off. "We all know the law, but aesthetics matter. We can't allow exceptions or the entire community will suffer." My pulse throbbed in my ears. Every word dripped with entitlement. I took a deep breath and spoke. "This ramp allows me to leave my home safely. It's not decoration. It's necessity. Are you really going to punish me for needing it?" The room went silent. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, reason would win. Then Harkins leaned forward, his grin sharpening like a knife. "Rules are rules," he repeated. "If we start bending them, we lose control. The fine stands." Gasps rippled through the room. Mrs. Kelly shot to her feet. "You're punishing someone for being disabled," she shouted. "Shame on you, Douglas." Harkins banged a gavel he'd brought from home, his face red. "Order. This is not up for debate. The board has spoken." The meeting ended with a vote, 4-3 in favor of upholding the fine. I left before they could see the tears welling in my eyes. Back in my apartment, I wheeled to the window and stared out at the parking lot lights. My heart felt heavy, but the earlier phone call echoed in my mind. The person I'd called was an old friend from college, now a real estate investor. A week before the meeting, he had casually mentioned that Maplewood Residences was being quietly shopped around for sale. At first, I'd laughed it off. Me owning part of this place? Impossible. But after tonight, impossible felt like my only way out. I grabbed my phone and dialed his number again. "Hey," he answered. "You ready to talk numbers?" I hesitated, my breath catching. "Yes," I said finally. "Tell me what it would take to buy the building." There was a pause on the line. Then he gave me a figure that made my heart skip. It was high, but not unreachable. With a loan and some help from a silent partner, it could work. As I ended the call, a spark of determination flared in my chest. Harkins thought he held all the power. He had no idea that his reign over Maplewood was already slipping. I went to bed that night with a plan forming in my mind, one that would take every ounce of patience I had. But before I could move forward, another blow was waiting. The next morning, I opened my door to find a bright orange notice nailed to the ramp itself. Final warning: remove structure within 7 days or face legal action. The wood beneath the nail splintered slightly, a cruel reminder of their threat. My hands trembled as I ripped the notice free. They weren't just fining me anymore. They were trying to erase the ramp completely. I clenched the paper in my fist and whispered to myself, "Not a chance." The orange notice burned in my pocket as I rolled back inside, my heart hammering like a warning drum. 7 days. They thought they could scare me into surrender, but all they had done was push me to move faster. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk with a notebook, crunching numbers, making calls, and sketching out a plan that would flip the entire board upside down. By morning, the first part of the deal was already moving. My college friend, Trevor, had secured a meeting with the property owner. Maplewood Residences wasn't owned by the HOA. It was owned by a private group that had been quietly looking to sell. They wanted out fast. Trevor explained that if we acted quickly, we could take control before the HOA even knew a sale was happening. The next days were a blur of high stakes and silent victories. While Harkins was busy plotting ways to rip down my ramp, I was meeting bankers, reviewing contracts, and calling in every favor I'd ever earned. Each signature I scribbled felt like a small piece of justice. The numbers were huge, numbers that made my head spin, but every time doubt crept in, I pictured Harkins smirk and tightened my grip on the pen. Meanwhile, the HOA kept escalating their attacks. A neighbor knocked late one night to warn me that Harkins had scheduled a crew to inspect my property for removal. I stayed up until dawn, waiting, but no one came. Instead, a letter arrived the next morning claiming I owed late fees on top of the fine. They wanted to bleed me dry. On the 6th day of the 7-day deadline, I got the call I'd been waiting for. Trevor's voice crackled with excitement. "We did it. Papers are signed. Funds cleared. Maplewood is yours." I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. "You mean? You're now the majority owner of the entire complex," he finished. "Congratulations, landlord." A strange calm washed over me. The ramp outside was still nailed with that cruel orange notice, but it no longer mattered. I wasn't just fighting a fine anymore. I was holding the keys to the battlefield. That evening, I rolled outside to feel the cool night air. Neighbors peeked through curtains as I passed, their eyes filled with curiosity. Mrs. Kelly stepped onto her porch and gave me a knowing smile. "Something tells me things are about to change," she whispered. The next morning, a storm brewed across Maplewood, though the sky was perfectly clear. I received a formal invitation to the next HOA meeting, scheduled for that night. The agenda: final decision on ramp demolition. I could almost hear Harkins rubbing his hands together as he planned his victory speech. When I arrived at the community hall, the tension was thick enough to taste. Board members sat stiffly at the table while residents crowded the back, whispering nervously. Harkins stood at the front, gavel in hand, eyes glittering like a man about to win a war. "Tonight," he began, "we settle the matter of the illegal wheelchair ramp once and for all." He paused for dramatic effect. "The board recommends immediate removal and additional penalties for non-compliance." Gasps echoed through the room. I rolled forward, my heart pounding like a drumbeat of defiance. "Before you proceed," I said calmly, "I have a few updates of my own." Harkins frowned. "This isn't your floor to speak." "It is now," I replied, pulling a thick envelope from my bag. "As of yesterday, I am the majority owner of Maplewood Residences. Effective immediately, this HOA answers to me." The room exploded. Chairs scraped against tile as residents leapt to their feet. Board members exchanged frantic glances. Mrs. Kelly covered her mouth, her eyes wide with delight. Harkins went pale, then red. "You, what?" "That's impossible," he sputtered. I slid the property deed across the table, the papers rustling like a victory anthem. "It's not only possible," I said, my voice steady, "it's legal. I own this building now. And as your landlord, I have a few changes in mind." Silence fell like a hammer. Every eye in the room locked on me as I leaned forward, letting the weight of my words settle. "First," I said, "the ramp stays. Forever. Second," I let the sentence hang, watching Harkins squirm. He opened his mouth to argue, but no sound came out. His power, once so heavy and cruel, vanished like smoke in the wind. I turned toward the crowd, my heart swelling with something far stronger than revenge. No one here will ever be fined for needing accessibility again. Not on my watch. The room erupted into cheers and applause, the sound echoing off the hall's walls like a thunderstorm of justice. Residents who had stayed silent for months now clapped and shouted, their faces lit with hope. Harkins slumped into his chair, defeated. For the first time since I'd moved to Maplewood, I felt the air shift. The fear that had once choked this community was gone, replaced by something bigger: kindness, unity, and the quiet strength of standing up for what's right. As the noise swelled, Mrs. Kelly caught my eye and mouthed the words, "Thank you." I smiled back, feeling the weight of the past weeks finally lift. The ramp outside gleamed in the moonlight when I returned home that night, sturdy and unshakable. It was more than wood and nails now. It was proof that even when power tries to crush you, determination can build something stronger. And for the first time in a long time, I slept with the peace of someone who knew that justice had found its way home. From a $500 fine to owning the entire building. That's how a simple wheelchair ramp exposed the ugly side of entitlement. And proved that kindness and determination always win. If you enjoyed this story of sweet, unexpected justice, hit like, share it with a friend who loves a good twist, and subscribe so you don't miss the next jaw-dropping story. Remember, never underestimate the quiet ones. See you in the next video.